Hi, it's Rob from the Bush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint a Carcharodon or Space Shark's primaris intercessor. If you'd like to support the channel, our Ko-fi and Patreon pages are linked below. Now on to the video. So the first colour today is going to be Vallejo Black. I'm going to use this to do the shoulder pads and the joins between the armour. There's little bits of almost rubber-like material, that's what I always think of them as. And also the body of the Boltgun. You just give those a nice smooth layer, and we can move on to the next one. On this video I haven't put on any of the kind of decorative patterns that they sometimes have on them, but if you do want to see any of them and how you can do them, then just give us a shout and I can get a video of that done quite easy. Next up we're going to be using some Vallejo Model Air Chrome. I'm going to use this to do all the silver parts on the miniature. So you've got the blade of the knife, you've got all the metallics on the bolt rifle, and also you can have the exhaust on the power pack on his back. That complete, we're now going to use Citadel Mournfang Brown. I'm going to use this to do his belt and his pouches too, also the leather strap on his bolt rifle. Now if you don't know about this chapter, it's worth having a read of it on the 40k wiki or something similar. Just having a good nose at the stories behind them and different aspects of lore. Yeah, quite an interesting chapter. Next up, a little bit of Mephiston Red from Citadel, and this is just going to be to do his eye lenses. Very quick layer this one. Like so. Next up, some Citadel Retributor Armor. I'm going to use this to do the handle of his blade and also the Aquila on his chest. So the Retributor Armor finished, this will be the final base colour that we're adding. So after the miniature was sprayed with Citadel Mechanicus Standard Grey before the video was started. So if you are doing the Space Sharks, you can base coat the majority of them with a spray of that. Next is the first shade, it's going to be Citadel Nuln Oil. I'm just going to give a wash this all over the armour, and all over the silvery metallics too, and the leather pouches. It's a very limited palette, this miniature, which is quite good. It does mean it takes a lot less time to do them. You're not going back and forth from paint pot to paint pot, getting all the new colours for your palette. So we're going to start with Citadel Mechanicus Standard Grey now, and start reapplying this to the armour. It appears that we've missed out Citadel Agrax Earthshade, which we've used to shade the gold. So if you haven't done so, use Citadel Agrax Earthshade to do the Aquila and the handle of the blade too. And when you're reapplying the Mechanicus Standard Grey, you want to think about where the light would be coming from and leave shade in the recesses and in the areas that wouldn't be getting too much colour, or too much light I should say. Next we're going to mix a little bit of Citadel Dawnstone with the Mechanicus Standard Grey. We'll be using this as the first highlight, making sure you're only adding it to areas that would be catching the light, and leaving the shade and the previous layer visible in areas that wouldn't be catching too much light. When you've done that, we're now going to use just some pure Citadel Dawnstone. I'm going to use this to do the final highlight on the armour. So you may want to be doing edges and highlighting details and just getting those to stand out that little bit more. So you're going for the top edges of things, and where you can't get the top edges, you want to be thinking about putting it on the bottom edges as well. But you want to make sure that you are leaving areas that wouldn't be catching too much light as one of the previous layers. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Retributor Armor. I'm just going to do the colours back onto the Aquila and the handle of the blade. For this you want to be leaving the Agrax Earthshade on the underside of any of the gold areas and just reapplying the Retributor Armor to the top surfaces. This will give you that shade on the underside. Good thing about using the shades on the metallics is the metallic still shows through, so you still get that bit of shine even when it's shaded. Then at a later point you can add some edge highlights just to make those details stand out on the underside too. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Liberator Gold. I'm going to use this to highlight the Aquila and the handle of his combat knife. I tend to do like half of each feather with this, the outer half of each feather. And then when we come to do the next highlight, I do a little bit towards the end, maybe about a quarter, and then try and do a little thin line on the bottom of the feathers too. Next up, it's Vallejo Modeler Chrome mixed with the Liberator Gold, and this gives you a nice highlight which stands out really well, adds a lot of shine to the edges. And that's all we're going to be doing here, is doing edge highlights and the very tips of each of those feathers. And that will just make the details stand out and make that really shine where you want it to shine. Now a little bit of Citadel Mournfang Brown. I'm going to reapply the colour to his pouches and his belt. So you want to leave the Null Oil shade in the recesses, just so you get those details nicely highlighted with that. Now I'm going to mix a little bit of Citadel Ricard Flesh with the Mournfang Brown. I'm just going to highlight those edges using a vertical stroke on the horizontals and a horizontal stroke on the verticals, and that will give you that nice rough highlight that makes it look like the leather has been scuffed. You can also do this on the sling for his rifle as well. I'm going to add a little bit more Ricard Flesh. I'm going to do another highlight to those leather sections. This time it's going to be just as rough, using the same kind of brush strokes but on a smaller area. So you'll have that lighter and slightly darker rough highlight around all the edges and the corners where they'd be getting scuffed. Next up we're going to be using some Vallejo Black. We're going to use this to do the shoulder pads and the bolt rifle, just go over any colours which may have spilled over onto the black areas and just recolour them in. So depending on how well you've done with the other colours, depends on whether you need to go over this. I usually have quite a bit of overspill when I'm putting the layers on, so you need to just touch up those edges and get it looking nice and crisp. like so. Next up, a little bit of Vallejo German Grey. You're going to be using this as the first highlight on the black sections. So you think about where the light's going to catch them. You want to be applying the German Grey to those areas, just to give it that slightly lighter shade. Now the German Grey is very dark, so it does stand out, you can see it, but not as much as some other greys. I just think it gives a really, really good highlight to black, because it is so dark. Once you've got all of the German Grey on there, you want to be using a little bit of Mechanicus Standard Grey once again. I'm going to use this to edge highlight all of those black areas, so you want to be doing the edges of the pauldrons, the edges of the bolt rifle. I only tend to do the top edges unless there isn't a top edge, in which case I'll do the bottom edge. And that is just to bring out the detail, and it gives the impression that the light is catching those top edges. Next up, Vallejo Modeler Chrome. Just going to paint on the little studs on the pouches, and also give this a little run down the front of the blade, and pick out a few little details on the bolt rifle, like the cocking handle which is on each side, just to get them coloured. Now we are going to use a little bit of Vallejo white to do the Carcharodon chapter badge on the shoulder. Now first we're going to just quickly pencil that in so you can get a rough idea of where the chapter badge is going to go. Then once you've got that rough outline in place, you can use the white to start doing the chapter badge. Now in kind of a unique way, they have the chapter badge on both shoulders, so it gives you the opportunity to paint it in both directions, because it always seems to have the shark's head facing forward. As I say, I'll put up a video of doing the chapter badge this coming Sunday. Now using a bit of Vallejo German Grey, and we're just going to touch up the edges of the chapter badge, that little shark there, just tweak that. We're going to put in the gills on the side of the body, going to sharpen up that jaw, get it looking nice, and then we'll come back with a little bit of white there just to paint on those teeth. I was going to paint on that tiny little eye that it has on the top of its head. Use that to touch up the top, and if you need to touch up the bottom of the shark, you can use a little bit of whichever black colour you're using. Now we're working on his eyes, we're going to use Citadel Mechanicus Red. We're going to reapply some of that colour, leaving a little bit of the shaded area around the edges of the lens, and also at the very front of the lens too. You want to leave a shaded area at the top of the front of the lens, just so you can have that little darkest area where you put the spot of light. Next up, I'm going to mix a little bit of Vallejo white with the Mechanicus Red, just to give that a nice highlight. We're going to be doing the highlights at the back lower edge of the lens, starting with about half the height of the lens, and then we're going to work to a few higher highlights. So I've done a little bit more Vallejo white to the previous mix, and we are now going to do another highlight over the other highlight. So you're going to be covering about 50% of the previous layer, as always, like so. And then the final layer for the eyes is going to be just pure Vallejo white. We're going to put a spot at the front of each lens, and then we're going to do a really tiny thin line of white where we've put those highlights. You just want to put a really, really thin highlight at the bottom of each lens. That is the finished Carcharodons Space Marine. Really pleased with how they turned out. It's a great looking chapter, the first grey Space Marine I've painted, so happy with how he turned out. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media, linked below. Thanks very much. If you like the channel, you enjoy the content, and you'd like to support us, our Ko-fi and Patreon pages are linked below. Thanks very much.